Essentially what we do as Qubit is to try and make the products that these guys sell successful in your organization. So we're a solutions provider, if you like, around the product sets themselves. Who am I? As I mentioned before, I used to work at Sun many years ago, sometime before Oracle bought Sun. We set off and set up Qubit to deliver solutions. A number of our customers over the years are moving from Sun to Oracle themselves. And over the last probably 6 months, I guess, we've had a number of those conversations. And the important thing is that when we look at those organizations and they come to us and they say, okay, I want to move to Oracle, what do I do? Is Oracle just got a tool that I run that does the migration? There are some tools for sure, but there's also a whole bunch of other things that determine whether or not you can move successfully from one platform to another. And when we looked at it, although that's quite a large step, the day-to-day life of the systems themselves are a constant series of steps, whether or not you're patching or you're adding systems. So today what I wanted to look at was the common themes, if you like, that make these transitions successful and hopefully make your system, well, I guess, live long enough to take on the kinds of technologies. One of the issues is that for a lot of people, the platforms aren't really in a position to take on these ideas anyway. So this is the problem for a lot of people in that they have a system today. It's basically it's sinking. They're spending a lot of time and effort just maintaining it. So when someone comes along and goes, I've got these great new ideas, you can put entitlement servers and a whole bunch of stuff on it. It's all very, very nice, but for a lot of people, they're not really in a position to go, okay, I want one of them, I'm going to plug it in, and we're going to start deriving benefit from it, because they're spending a lot of time just doing this sort of activity, essentially. So a lot of what we deal with day to day, probably actually a big chunk of our business is just helping customers who've had an existing solution get to a point where they can actually move on and take on some of the newer technologies themselves. And that's not just Sun to Oracle. That can be an existing Oracle customer who wants to move from 10G to 11G, or a Sun customer that wants to go to OpenSSO or whatever. So getting to that point, though, is not necessarily that easy. They're not always in a state where they can take on these sorts of technologies. So I'm going to talk a bit about that today. So this is kind of crucial to the whole discussion, really. Time. So what we see is a lot of systems, if you like, they trundle along. Actually, there's probably a big step where you do the initial deployment, so that's phase one, if you like. So if this is the value to the business, and that's your timeline as you kind of go along, there's an initial step, and you go, okay, we've got it up and running. There's clear value. That's kind of good. You go along for a while, and there might be a little step where you go, okay, I need to apply a patch here. And you go along a bit further and you go, actually, I need to add another system to IDM. Go along a bit further, another step maybe. And then you might go, okay, I need to migrate onto new hardware. The hardware's old. Yeah, that's quite a big step. And off you go. And then you continue on to, somewhere at this point, there might be another bigger step where you go from, say, Sun to Oracle. I don't know if you can see that. And there might be another bigger step down the track where you go to, cloud-based computing. So the important thing is that what we see with a lot of customers is they can usually get past this step pretty easily. That's, system integrator comes in, they install the products, they kind of get it working. But quite often, by the time they even get to just patching the system down the track, they find it very hard to do. And it's kind of unusual in a way, but I'm going to talk a bit about this today. So even these relatively small events, for some organizations, are a big challenge. They don't have the right test environments. They don't understand what the patch means, whether or not they've got past the product that even use that patch, what the impact is, what they'd need to test. So when you look at these bigger steps, which I talked about earlier, which is moving, say, from Sun to Oracle or from Oracle up into the cloud or whatever, what determines whether or not you're in a fit state to do that really depends on a whole bunch of stuff, like whether or not you've got the capability to even do these small steps. So for a lot of organizations, they might get to this stage, fail to do the patch, and effectively the value to the business continues on relatively low, and then they might try and do another big step up. So a lot of what we get involved in is, the initial project delivery, obviously, and helping organizations get to the point where they can actually move down this path and increase value, because it is quite tricky. So a lot of people do struggle with that, and it's kind of a shame in a way, because all the new stuff that's coming downstream that these guys are producing is largely inaccessible to a lot of people. They go, that's fantastic, but I just don't know how to get that into my system successfully. So what's different about identity management from other systems? Don't all systems suffer from this problem? Well, they do to some extent, but the main one of the main differentiators is the fact that they're typically highly connected systems. So they have a lot of touch points. So this is a common problem for integration systems across the board, really. If you just had a simple siloed, or even a complex siloed system, you tend not to get these kind of problems because you can address the issues in isolation largely. But once it becomes highly connected, and they don't have to be that highly connected before it becomes a big problem either. So for some identity management systems, they rarely get past 2 or 3 target systems, really. And at that point, it's like, oh my God, it's too hard. So this might be, say, a workflow enhancement, customization, or whatever. And again, they're relatively small, but what happens over time is that the systems become more brittle, they become harder to maintain. The target systems so you had a version, say you had a 10G deployment originally, and all the target systems matched up. We've got adapters for all these. As these systems become updated as well, you end up with this kind of slightly distorted, oh, actually, we don't have that for 10G anymore. You've got to move to 11G. So the more connected it becomes, the more difficult the dependencies become as well. But the point is, I guess, you get this breadth of versions that go from really old to new, and the identity management system sitting in the middle of all this has to cope with a vast range of different versions. And it's that really that leads to this difficulty in extending the systems over time as well. So this Stairway to Heaven really was all about, if you want to track what these guys are doing on the sales side and all the new innovations that are coming out, what are the kinds of things that you need to do to make sure that you can get to that point? And a lot of what I'm talking about today is very basic stuff. So for a lot of people, they go, oh, I know, we got some consultants in. They said we needed IDLE, we needed Qubit. That's what we need. We need better processes. We need TOGAF. We need whatever. And you go, we need a Porsche. We need a Rolex. I mean, that's the standard answer is your processes are crap. What you need to do is you need to get IDLE in here and get all that all sorted. And, project management, you need Prince 2 and things. And you go, well, that's what you're told typically. But actually, that's what we see for most organizations, is that they really struggle, through a precarious path, if you like, to get anywhere near mature enough to adopt these technologies. They're really struggling with pretty basic things like environments and patching and connectivity and understanding how the system works today. So although, if you go and read a whole bunch of stuff from Gartner through to whatever, they'll have standard answers to these things and go, yep, we need better process, need this, that, and the other. And all that stuff's good stuff. Don't get me wrong. We've got TOGAF certified architects and stuff. That's all good stuff. But for a lot of organizations, they're still at a much more basic level and struggling with day-to-day activities, systems falling over, patching, and a whole bunch of other stuff. Okay, so I want to talk about key success factors, I guess. So what we've seen over many years in various accounts as to what kind of organizations have successful identity management deployments. In other words, which ones can track over time and support these kind of changes relatively easily, and which ones can't. And I said at the beginning, it's a relatively simplistic view in the main, but it's amazingly true. So the Vietnam War suffered from a couple of issues. One of them was obviously that a lot of the people didn't have a clear idea of what they were trying to do there, and even when they came back from the war, they didn't have a ticker-tape parade or anything because people didn't really support it. They didn't know what it was for. People spent a lot of time and money on it. It lasted for 16 years. And unfortunately, a lot of identity management projects suffer from this problem as well, where people aren't really quite sure what they're trying to do. And I don't mean just provisioning. So a lot of projects end up going, we're going to provision from HR to AD. Okay, so that's the project. But what's the aim of identity management across the organization? Where do you want this thing to go in 5 years? So for a lot of these teams, they don't have a clear idea, really, of where they're trying to get to. So for organizations that we see as being successful, they maintain a clear vision, really, from the beginning as whether, what they're trying to do over time. So they can see projects in isolation that may not make a difference across the board, but they can see where they're heading long-term, if you like. So very few organizations have this. There's only one that I've worked with about a year and a half ago that we did an enterprise architecture gig for. He sat down and they said, no, I need you to tell us in 2 or 3 sentences what we're trying to do with identity management. And I went, but you already have one. How did you get one of those? And then we don't know. So I said, well, go and find the business case and bring it in and show me. And they went away and they came back and said, we don't really know. I think the CIO went to a Gartner conference and came back and bought identity management. But it's not that uncommon, really, for people to go, well, I think we're using it for provisioning. And you go, okay, so is that it then? Because if that's it, that's fine. But, there's plenty of organizations that have people, 1 or 2 people full-time provisioning people manually into systems. In fact, I had a customer a while back that said, I want to buy an identity management system. I said, how do you do it today? I've got one person, I'll pay them, I don't know, $60,000 a year. And they do all of it. And I went, okay, I would just continue paying them $60,000 a year if that's, do they do a good job? And they went, yes, fantastic. And I went, it's going to take you 10 years just to even recoup your costs, really. So if that's all you want it for, then you need to be clear on why. So the other, just to lay on top of this diagram here, the other issue is the leadership and evangelizing issue. So a lot of these projects, when they first start off, phase one, we're going to buy identity management. They talk to Andrew, they buy it, they get it installed. Okay, that's great, it's all good. There's usually a bunch of people at that point who are very keen on it, understand the subject area really well, they understand the benefits, and they get a team together and they put it in. But what happens typically after that is that these people don't hang around after that. So if you look at the, I don't know, time scale here, if this is 5 to 7 years or something, if you look at the life cycle of the people, so they might start here as the evangelists, and they might last through to, I don't know, 2 years maybe less. Actually, in some instances, because they're very keen on just evangelizing, they'll hang around for 6 months and then go on to another role or another organization. And then what's left, it's handed over to an operational team at that point. So it goes from an exciting development project that's kind of interesting into something that's kind of not that interesting at all and looked after by the ops team. And then that kind of ticks along. But what happens is that a lot of the IP starts to get lost. The momentum gets lost. And then you kind of hit one of these points, like a patching or adding another system, and they go, well, I don't know, we don't have guys that do that anymore. We just have guys that look after it and restart it and stuff. So the evangelist side and just making sure that you've got people around who maintain this vision and the trajectory is very, very important. So for companies where these teams have disappeared, often fail pretty much at that point and have this dotted line, if you like, that goes on for another couple of years. And then the step that they have for moving, say, from Sun to Oracle is not this step anymore, it's this step. So the longer you leave it, in some ways, where you're not tracking, maintaining the system, keeping it up to date, the harder it becomes. So that's the kind of things that we see quite often. I don't really know what the answer is, apart from the fact that you have to be able to deal with these events as they come downstream. Even if they're relatively small events, you have to deal with them to keep climbing up this stairway to heaven, if you like, to keep adding value to the business. Because if you don't, then the whole thing just degrades over time. So where we see accounts where this leadership remains through these transitions, then usually those teams are much better placed to actually deal with these events as they come downstream. If these people leave and it just goes into an operational mode, then it pretty much stays like that for a very long time, sometimes for years. For some of our customers, they've been like that for years, and then they're looking to move to Oracle. But as I said, the step then becomes bigger. So is this the answer? So for a lot of organizations, especially when they start off, buying a product becomes the main part of the identity management project, if you like. And that's okay. You kind of need to do that, and you do need to get the product and install it and get it up and running. But what tends to happen is that it becomes all-consuming. So 90% of the budget for identity and access management becomes installing and configuring the product themselves. So I don't know about your experiences, but for a lot of our customers, we do a lot of project rescues where it's been installed and configured, and then they go, whoa, I don't know what this thing's doing, and they kind of leave it alone. But there's a lot of other activities that you have to do, obviously, to get a complete identity and access management system. There's all the policies and the processes around it. There's a whole bunch of stuff which has got nothing to do with the product itself, really, that people kind of miss out on. So the focus on the product, while the products are good and an important part, become the be-all and end-all of the identity management system. So we get involved to do, as an SI, they'll go, we bought the product, come in and do this, install it and get it working and implement these basic workflows. And you do that and you go, but there's a lot more you kind of have to do, and you have to understand what it means to move through these different areas. You have to work out which systems you want to target initially. You need to get the system owners on board. They're going to get approval emails, all that kind of stuff. Just putting together the whole package, if you like, that system that delivers whatever you decide it to be in the end. So for one of our customers, for example, we ended up with a relatively simple mission, if you like, to make sure that the right people got access to the right things at the right time and were able to prove that was true, which is the audit piece, okay? And it's relatively simple, but from that they can go, who are the right people? There's a whole bunch of communities. There's our customers, there's the staff, there's our partners. So you can start to draw out who the right people are, and then you go, how do you know that they're the right people? Well, at runtime, there's the authentication. In some cases, it's two-factor. At provisioning time, it's, you have to get approvals. Later on, you have attestations. So very, very quickly, from a very simple core statement, and I said, yeah, that's what we're trying to get to. We want to make sure the right people get access to the right things. You end up with this whole, view of what the system needs to do, if you like, of which the product does, is a central part of that for sure, but there's all these other activities need to be done. So it's very common for us to deliver technology and then go, but you have to do more than this. So if you can't maintain this momentum through these change events that comes through, then a lot of that stuff ends up, well, not so much being wasted, but it doesn't ever reach its potential, if you like. So you might buy a product and do a small amount of implementation on it, but the products themselves aren't cheap either, and they have a fantastic range of possibilities and potential. So to unlock that, you really got to move through these various steps, really. So you can't just let the team go at the early stage and then kind of go, oh, we're okay now, that's fine. But yeah, it's interesting that if you challenge people to tell you what it is that they want to achieve long term for their identity and access management system, most of the answers are we need to get provisioning from HR into AD working. You kind of go, okay, so that's that's kind of interesting. But what do you want to do, long term? What's the overall vision? What does this really mean? How do you know if you're getting there? What is this thing anyway? For a lot of organisations, they don't have that kind of enterprise architecture view, if you like, nailed down. So this comes back to what we're talking about here, really. You need a system like that, otherwise you're just going to get chaos, essentially. And in the middle of it, you'll get an expensive product running, generating heat in a data center somewhere, but largely chaos all around. The other issue with identity management that you don't see with a lot of other integration projects is the fact that a lot of the back-end systems, backdoor ways of getting people into systems, like AD or whatever, still remain in place. So when the system itself isn't performing or people lose faith in it, they'll just hop on and get an AD admin, he'll add you in anyway, copy someone else's profile. So it has a tendency to kind of leak information, if you like, rather quickly. So when people lose faith in it, you'll find that they've just gone back to the old ways of doing it. And in some cases, the system's only used for 50% of the provisioning because, over time, as people have lost faith and it's not reliable anymore, they've gone back to, oh, no, I know Bob can put me in the finance system. That's good. So you need a means of dealing with the whole thing. So this is the lemon detox diet. So one of the issues with the lemon detox diet, obviously, is the fact that you don't really know if it's working. It's the fact that you can build this system, or you can pay money and you get an SI and you can buy a product, but how do you know if it's working? For relatively simple things like provisioning into AD, you go, I can see stuff happening there. That's kind of cool. If it's a bigger picture thing, like you say, I want to make sure that the right people get access to the right things, and you need to be able to prove it. You need to be able to do this. You need to be able to prove that your system is actually driving to a point where you have faith that the identities in the target systems really are the right people and they have the right entitlements and stuff. So this is such a big problem, really, that it's spawned this whole industry of identity analytics and those sorts of products that, if you like, take all the stuff from the back ends and then attempt to, attestation through managers and a whole bunch of other things and end up with a residue of accounts that shouldn't really be there. And what you should really see, if it was working correctly, is that over time this residue of unknown accounts or orphaned accounts or people who've moved on that shouldn't be there, that pool should really, if the system's working correctly, gradually get smaller and smaller to a manageable point where you go, it's okay now. Every 3 months we're getting about 10 of these guys coming in. I know what that is. That's fine. That was an accidental test account or something. But if you don't have some way of measuring it, then it's very hard to know if you're getting to your target goal, and it's very hard to improve the overall system itself, whether or not the policies and the procedures and stuff are working. So this is another kind of critical factor. And again, it results in people losing faith in it because they go, I've just spent another $1 million on this. I don't know if it's doing any more for me now than it did last year. So unless you can answer that question, it's very hard to kind of convince people to keep throwing money at it and making it work. So doing this in whatever way you need to, whether it's through identity analytics or measuring some other factor, is also crucial to making sure that you understand that you're moving kind of up this food chain. Are you ready? There's a whole bunch of stuff we put together for Sun to Oracle migrations. There's a whole document that kind of goes through everything from training through to do you understand how your system works? So I'm just going to go through some of the really basic ones here. So there's a thing we call the whiteboard test, which is if you got your team in a room and you had a blank whiteboard and you went, okay, I want you guys to come in and draw for me on the whiteboard what this system does and how it hangs together. For the organizations that are successful, that do this well, they'll jump up and they'll start drawing immediately. They'll know, yeah, this identity manager is connected to this, that, and the other. And depending on the focus, some of the ops guys will come in and they'll be able to tell you, how the backups are done and how they're restored and those sorts of things. The developers will be able to tell you, how the workflows work and a whole bunch of other stuff. If you end up with your team in a room and there's stunned silence, then you should probably start worrying. And it sounds so obvious, really, but it's such a simple thing to do. It's slightly confronting, I guess. And we don't do it on purpose. It's just that if we come into an organization that's kind of going through this, and we get the guys in a room, we go, bring all their information, and we want to understand your system. Here you go. Can someone draw what you have? If at that point there's stunned silence, then you kind of go, okay, so this is going to be harder than I'd hoped it was going to be. So it's a very important thing, though, and it's such an obvious, simple test. And if you don't have, I'm not just talking about the people in the organization, you can include the partners and all the other people involved in maintaining the system, maybe the level 2 support people, whoever, it doesn't really matter. If they can't do that, then you're probably in trouble. In other words, you're going to have great difficulty going through some of these steps. So for us, when we do, say, a Sun to Oracle transition, if we can't do that, if we can't get documentation that clearly describes what it does and there aren't people there who know how it works, then what it means for us is we have to do archaeology, effectively, and go and reverse engineer how the current system works. I mean, it's all doable and it's all there and you can look through the workflows and stuff, but you kind of go, there's a good chance we'd miss stuff as well. So that's kind of hard. But the important thing there is that when these events occur, so if you have people who do have a good understanding and you kind of go, okay, we need to patch the system, say something relatively straightforward. So Oracle releases a patch, and you look at the release notes and you go, okay, so this is a security patch for blah, 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 blah. So the first thing you need to be able to do is to go, actually, does this address any part of the product that we have installed today? So for some of our customers, well, they'll buy a product suite. They don't necessarily have all that stuff installed, and they might not necessarily be using all the functionality, are they? So the first thing they need to know is, actually, does this patch even apply to me? So you need people who understand the current system to go, no, mate, that addresses this thing over here. We don't even use that. We're using this stuff over here. So straight away, you kind of either have to deal with it or you don't. If you do then go, yep, okay, no, it's part of the product, then they need to understand what the impact is and go, it's going to affect this part. So when you get to deploying it, you're going to have to test it. You don't want to have to test the entire thing from front to back. You want to regression test the area that it's going to impact, right? So immediately, if you have someone who understands it to a large extent, they can go, you don't have to, retest the whole thing. You just need to retest this bit over here, regression testing this piece, because that's the only part that it impacts. So your ability to deal with these events and get the guys in a room and kind of go, yep, no, that's important. No, forget that. We don't even do that. Again, is a big factor in the long-term success. And for companies that can't do that, they end up with a patch and go, I don't know what to do with this. Is it important to me or not? And what's the risk of deploying it anyway? So it is important to have guys in the room that can kind of go, yep, I'll draw it for you. This is how it works. So the other thing, again, for us, when we come into an organization, what we're looking for in terms of documentation, durable documentation, it is not necessarily all the little technical details, all the low-level configuration details. What we're really after is the stuff that persists, if you like, through all these transitions. So it's things like, so what's this system for? What are the workflows? What other systems does it touch? What do you do about, is it a high availability solution? All those kind of high-level intentions. In fact, in some ways, the more high-level the documentation is, really, the more value it has. And because the stuff that's relatively low-level, the more technical details, are actually the stuff that's much more volatile anyway. And it's the stuff that's relatively easy to find out in just looking at config files and other stuff. So what we're really looking for, if someone says, oh, I want to have a look at doing a Sun to Oracle or Oracle to cloud migration, it is not that low-level detail stuff. It's much more the high-level, the purpose, the workflows, the systems it touches, the system owners themselves, all those sorts of things. But what we often find, though, is not that stuff at all. It's the low-level technical stuff. So someone says, I've got an architecture document. But what they really have is, a network topology and a deployment diagram. And you go, oh, well, that's good. That's kind of nice. It's good for the ops guys, but it doesn't really tell me how your system works. It doesn't have that. I don't know if you guys have seen the how things work diagrams, like cutaway of nail guns or whatever. This kind of simplistic color diagrams. What we're after is kind of that view, if you like, of the system itself to understand the behavior, how it works, what you expect it to do. So if you have documentation that kind of captures all that stuff that actually should endure longer than the day-to-day kind of transitions, like the patching and other bits and pieces, then that has more value in a way than the technical stuff itself. But one of the biggest factors that we see in terms of long-term viability of a system is having people who understand how to deploy this stuff and can do a good delivery. If you end up with people who kind of go, I'm reading the manual, I need to do a training course, I think we'll be okay, then you're probably going to be in big trouble. This is, I mean, for a lot of people, just installing these products is not easy. But I had a prospective customer rang me a while back and they said, we've bought the Oracle Suite, we've just spent the last 3 months trying to install it, I've got one product installed, and I need assistance installing the other products. And then I think we'll be okay. And you go, I think you won't be okay. But, I mean, it's all doable, and you kind of need to, this is our pitch, I guess, you need to get a bunch of people who do this stuff all the time, because the amount of stuff that the guys learn across multiple projects, across different customers, is very, very hard to gain just individually on an account itself. And that's probably one of the biggest determining factors, really. So we have customers where we've been there for 5 years. So we've ended up, if you like, as the go-to guys for the environments themselves. So a number of our customers that we got on board a few years back, we've maintained that relationship all the way through. In fact, pretty much all our customers, really. And so if you look at a 2 to 3 year span for most individuals within the organisation, and that's good too. You certainly need that. In some ways, for some organisations anyway, they find that the longer lasting relationship in terms of the body of knowledge actually resides with the system integrator themselves, especially if they have a vested interest in making sure that they're there. So if they have support and they're deploying projects and stuff all the time, then you'll find that they end up having to maintain a repository of documentation that's probably better than the customer's one in the main. But I mean, there's different ways of doing it. Large organisations can support their own teams. Medium-sized organisations find it very hard to maintain, a team. Okay, can you test it? So the other thing that's alarmingly poor for most organisations is their ability to test changes before putting into production. And this, I think, goes back to not the fact that they don't do testing, is the fact that because they're highly connected systems, it's very hard to get a complete end-to-end integration environment up and running that faithfully resembles the production system itself. So I think it's just a factor that identity management systems in the main are notoriously difficult to do end-to-end testing. They have these kind of tentacles all over the place, really. So for a number of companies we work with, their test environments are so, well, not so much poor, but they differ so markedly from the production environments that they can't even test relatively straightforward patches before putting them in production. And putting something straight into production, which we do with a number of people because they just fail to be able to do that step, is obviously unbelievably fraught with danger. As I mentioned at the beginning, one of the issues that people face is a lack of faith in the systems themselves, if you like, and end up manipulating identities around the back. Putting stuff straight in production that fails and having to roll back is another one of those things that just makes people have less faith in the system as a whole. For some companies, they end up with a DR on a production site where they'll swap back and forth, and they lose the DR site for pre-production testing. And actually, that's probably one of the best ways to go, to be honest. In fact, you should probably spontaneously go, we're going to switch one with the other without telling you, to make sure that you keep both systems in parity. Because if you have that ability, then you've got that production support environment where you can faithfully test stuff. If you knew it was going to be swapped over every couple of weeks or whatever, then that would be an excellent way of doing it. I don't know of any other sensible way of doing it, to be honest. For smaller test environments, it's very hard. I'm not blaming organisations. It's just very hard to get all that kit together in an end-to-end environment that faithfully represents the production system. But if you can, and some organisations have done a really good job of this, if you can do that, then you'll quite easily skip across these steps, especially the smaller ones like patching and product rollout. So that's, I mean, it looks like it's common sense, and it is, but it's surprising how many organisations don't have the ability to test stuff well at all. Okay, so what I want you to do next, be brave and speak up. A lot of organizations have the most basic problems. I said it here often, they want to do idle and Prince2 and a whole bunch of stuff, and you go, yes, okay, that's fine, but really, if you look at what you have today and the issues that you have, they're pretty easy to spot, to be honest. They're not so easy to address necessarily, but but the first part of the problem is identifying what the problem is and then moving on from there. And if you've got any questions, if you want to talk about your systems or get us in and do a bit of a whiteboard test or whatever you want to do, I'm more than happy to come along and talk to you for sure. All right, thanks for your time. Any questions?